do what we know to do, you know.
And there's enough food for them, like that.
Yeah.
That
Have some fish.
Uh-oh. And shush.
All right, good morning. It's July 30th. We're here in Madras, Oregon for the quarterly Oregon State Marine Board's quarterly meeting. Three of us are present here. Our fourth member Wild, is participating via Teams. Before we hit our agenda, we have a couple of announcements and presentations. Do any of the board members have any announcements they want to make? Member Wild, any announcements?
At the moment.
Okay. So we have a couple of awards we want to present. The first one is a coin being presented to retired Lincoln County Sheriff Deputy Dion Blake. Deputy Blake served Lincoln County Sheriff's Office for over 14 years, combining part-time and full-time service. Much of that time was spent in Marine Patrol. Lincoln County is complex in that it encompasses a number of different kinds of waterways, from very small rivers and creeks to saltwater bays. Deputy Blake embraced the EBRS technology when Oregon State Marine Board first implemented it, and has used it to help identify potential abandoned and derelict vessels before they become abandoned or derelict. He's mentored cadets in the use of the EBRS program, helping them train the next generation of Lincoln County Marine law enforcement. He was an integral part of OSMB's marine law enforcement training programs, helping out across all courses, including Swiftwater Rescue, PWC, Drift Jet, and the 2-week Marine Law Enforcement Academy. He was also quick to ask me, what can I do to help you do your job on the board? Not only did I experience this, but I've heard from several current and past board members, they also experienced the same sorts of things. Dion's main mode of operation, I guess, is that he really wants to help people do their jobs better and be better people. So thank you, Dion, for your service to the voters of Oregon and for inspiring me in my role as a board member. Our next one is a coin for recently retired Hood River County Sheriff's Department Deputy Joel Carmody. Deputy Carmody served the Hood River County Sheriff's Office for over 20 years, with about 4 as the Marine Deputy. Before joining Marine, he was active in training for the Hood River Sheriff's Office, and shortly after joining our group of Marine law enforcement officers, moved from being a trainee to an instructor. He was an integral part of our PWC and the 2-week Marine Law Enforcement Academy trainings. Outside of his Hood River Sheriff Office duties, he volunteered his time in the community, working with kids in the Hood River Aquatic Center and with community programs such as Member Wild's Wild Wind and Water and the Via Tuiagua program. He continues these volunteer activities in his retirement. I met Joel at his first training after taking on the role. I appreciated him talking with me about the challenges with all the human and wind-powered sports going on in his geographic area, and asking my ideas and perspective about that. During his time, he built a great rapport with the community in the Gorge as he followed the concept seek to understand as well as to be understood. Thank you, Joel, for your service to the voters of Oregon and helping me be a better board member. And you can stay up here. Brian, do you want to do this one?
Let me
get a little background going.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for the record, Brian Paulson, Voting Safety Manager, Voting Law Administrator for the Oregon State Marine Board. On behalf of the Marine Law Enforcement Program, we're here to recognize Joel Carmody Service Excellence Award. Truly, it's with great pride and excitement that we announce that Deputy Joel Carmody is a recipient of the Oregon State Marine Board Service Excellence Award for the 2020 season. Deputy Carmody has consistently gone above and beyond youth education, community outreach, and public engagement. Dedication, leadership, passion for patrol has made a meaningful impact on recreational boating safety across our community. In his efforts, he exemplifies exemplifies the high standards of service, professionalism, and commitment to serving organizational voting public. Appreciation. And you with this award.
Thank you.
And with that, thank you both gentlemen for coming up today to be here. So moving into our agenda, the first item is approval of minutes from our April 23rd board meeting. Jennifer, thank you for your meetingness as always. Do we have any discussion about the meeting minutes from the April meeting? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from April 23 board meeting as presented.
I'll second. We have a motion and a second to approve the board meeting minutes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the minutes are approved.
One thing,
Yeah.
I noticed that the minutes that were included in the agenda packet for the June 17th work session were not on here. Should we approve those as well, Jennifer?
I was thinking, I had that same thought and I forgot to ask. All right, so again, we have the meeting minutes from the June 17th work session. Do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as presented in the board packet from the June 17th work session.
And I second. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the minutes from
Aye.
the June 17th work session? Aye.
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 Okay, the minutes
Aye.
from the work session are approved. Jennifer, do we have anybody signed up for public comment? Okay, so we will move on to our first agenda item, which is Director's Agency Report.
Chair Jackson, members of the board, Jim Warren, Director of your Oregon State Marine Board. Just a few things I wanted to call out that aren't written in the report, and then happy to take any questions that you have. First, just want to acknowledge that we're in a community that's experiencing quite a bit of upheaval with the fires. Madras sits right in the middle of what seems to be the three biggest in our state right now, and really just always appreciate how welcoming Madras is to the Marine Board. We have our Law Enforcement Academy here in May. We definitely checked in and made sure the community was good with us still being here, and that they made sure we weren't taking away from any resources on the fire. But really appreciate the community and all they're doing to keep each other safe, and our Marine Patrol folks definitely are probably out being a part of that. So wanted to call out maybe the obvious in the room as you're sitting in front of some new technology. People really struggle to understand how challenging it is to host a hybrid meeting where you have to have people in person and people online and people trying to hear. And the Marine Board was one of the first agencies to figure out sort of how to start doing it. Others were copying us, and we know we needed to keep getting better. We have a really good online experience. We didn't always have the best in-person experience. And it just takes kind of a more technology than it seems like it should to be able to do this. So you're looking at all sorts of new equipment today, and the majority of that is to improve the people who show up's experience while not degrading our online experience. So still work in progress, but it seems to be working this morning, so we'll roll with it. But that's Jennifer, Phil Hudspeth, and Norma, who have been working on this for the last few months just to figure it all out. Our goal was not to have a big ugly mixing board. You see, we failed. So we could DJ on the weekends, apparently. I don't know, but that's what it takes to not have the feedback. Wanted to remind the board, governor's expectation is that I have a review formally every 2 years. Our board has always done an annual review. That was consistent with most board-led directors. It was new for most non-board-led directors to even get a performance review. So in the even years of the cycle, which is this year for us, we have to go through the formal governor process of the review. So what that's going to look like is we'll get some help from DAS HR. They'll send out questions to the board, to staff at the Marine Board, to some of our partner organizations, and probably at our January meeting, because I think it's technically due in December, but we're not going to call a special meeting just for that. You all will get that feedback, and we'll go through a performance review. So Monique Yerby is our human resource contact for DASH. She'll probably help lead it. There's been 2 process changes. Neither of them, I think, will really change anything the board's doing. The first one is there was initially some thought that we had to use this very formal contracted service with very formal questions, and they just sort of found out that wasn't working for the small agencies. So we have a little more autonomy to do it like we've always done it, so to speak, and use some of the same questions and things that we've done. So we'll probably continue to do it how we did our last one with this. And then there was also, part of the process was supposed to involve the chair and the director appearing before the governor's office to get part of that review. And for 100 reasons, that's no longer part of the process. And probably mostly just because the time on that would have been incredible. So you all will deliver that performance review. It will go to the governor's office for review. If they have any questions or have any interest in talking further with either you or me about that, then they would do that. So that'll be upcoming, and we'll talk more about it in October, because that's probably about when some of those questionnaires and things will go out. So, and then the only other one I wanted to mention is we definitely have some vacant board seat, right? And so for those that don't know, just for people that may be listening, we're a unique board in that we don't have designated seats in law. So some boards have, it has to be this congressional district, it has to be this type of person, it has to be that. And in some ways that's easier because a seat is a seat, and you know right who can fill it, and that. Our board just says it has to be 5 people that have lived in Oregon, I think, for a certain amount of time and you know, are willing to show up and do the job for whatever, you know, the $25 or whatever you get. So, you know, the willing. With that said, we work really hard to maintain balance on geography. We work really hard to maintain balance on voting styles. We work really hard to get a diverse set of opinions, because that makes our board better. So with that said, just with the way of process, we will probably look as an agency to have at least one candidate ready to go in January. So what that means is if you have people that would like to be on the board, start encouraging them now to reach out to Jennifer and I, and we'll help them understand the process. To be clear, the decision belongs with the governor. I'm just a facilitator of helping people apply, helping understand what the obligation looks like, but I am in no way part of the decision-making string on that one. Occasionally they will ask my opinion if there's multiple people, but again, I typically find out when the applicant finds out who's getting the board position. Looking at our board and thinking about our strengths that we have now and where we have some gaps, I personally see one of our biggest gaps just being kind of the east of the Cascades. We also have a little gap in the coast. You know, Member Wild is, you know, she's, in the old days, Hood River would have been considered sort of Central Oregon, Eastern Oregon, but now it's probably considered a little more Portland proper than not, they probably like to admit, but, so we're not devoid of representation outside of that part of the valley, but just maybe someone even, you know, Bend area, Pendleton area. So if you have people in mind that you think might be interested and are good, think about what's represented and think about people that would fill some gaps for us and refer them on. And so, and then with that also, this kind of the sad news is our next person who comes up on their term is Chair Jackson. And so we'll also, at the same time, it's always good when you've got 2 kind of close together to be thinking about that is a way to keep all your balance and what's going on and make sure you have good representation. So sometimes having that in the queue can be helpful as well. So certainly would be surprised if any appointments got made before December. So I would expect that if we can be ready to go January, that would be the best position the agency could be in.
Great.
With that, happy to take questions.
Any questions for Director Warren?
I got some questions with some comments and maybe mixed in with some questions. So I noticed you went out with the BSA team to some schools.
I did, Member Lambert. They sent me to a grade school, and oh boy, I am not cut out to be a grade school teacher. That's what I learned.
Yeah, but I was pleased to see in the report that it said that over, I believe it was like half the kids in that classroom have been on a boat before, which seemed way higher than I would have expected. So that's for the next generation of potential boaters, I thought that was pretty inspiring.
Yeah, Member Lambert, that was probably the most surprising thing, is one of the first questions that the BSA Tiffany had asked was, how many of you been on a boat? And I was shocked at how many questions came up. Partially, just to be candid, we purposefully go into often low-income schools. This is a low-income bilingual school in Salem area. And then the kids start telling you everything their parents have done on a boat about not putting them in life jackets and things. It's just, the connections were amazing. We got to over 140 kids that day.
That's cool.
And really raise that profile.
Yeah, good job on that. Good job for the BSA team. I'm very
Oh.
happy with the BSA team, the presence across the state.
Yeah.
They have a huge presence in Southern Oregon this year, hitting schools and just
Yeah.
making contact at that early age. I think is super important. So
Yeah.
good job to Priscilla and her team, and
Yeah.
good job to you for going out there and supporting them. Another question on the Malala River trees. Man, that photo that was included in the board book, holy moly, that's harrowing, all those trees that are in the creek up there. I know it was mentioned in the book that we're doing some outreach at some of the sites to give people a heads up to scout ahead, look for their river route, look for potential takeout, et cetera. Is there anything else that we should be doing in that situation? I really don't know much about that river, so I'm just curious.
Member Lambert, the other thing that we're doing is an after-action review where we're really coordinating with all the agencies involved and just helping them understand that, in future situations like this, how they can better think about and include boating as part of their planning.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the organizations, quite candidly, were surprised anybody even boated there. And we had to kind of say, hey, there's going to be some people that are a little surprised that the Malala River's shifted significantly, and there's going to be a log jam for the rest of our lives there. And, it's going to impact whitewater rafting community particularly, or whitewater kayaking community particularly. And so just really trying to make sure in the future that we're got the seat at the table when they're planning some of those things.
Yeah, it reminded me of some of the discussions we've been having down on the Klamath with some of the water releases that the Bureau of Reclamation is doing, and just precisely what you said, managing a river system and managing the natural elements of a river after a flood event and everything else without much context or thought to how it impacts boaters. So I appreciate staff working hard to continue to raise the relevance of impacts to boaters in these discussions as people continue their planning efforts. So good job on that front. The EBER system, I noticed in that write-up there, just continue to be impressed with that system. The fact that we made 20,000 contacts is already this year, and that system is huge. I did notice, it was interesting to me, I like following trends, and the trend of non-motorized contacts versus motorized contacts, and it was like almost 60-40, 60% being non-motorized contacts, 40% being motorized contact. Have we ever, in a lot of our discussions, that kind of split between motorized versus non-motorized use and patterns and stuff comes up. A lot of what we get is based off of hearsay or whatnot. This EBER system seems to be a pretty good way to get us some pretty accurate data on who's using the river, how it's using the river, assuming that law enforcement is applying those contacts pretty consistently. I'm just curious, is that 60-40, and anybody else from the team feel free to jump in, is that pretty reflective of statewide distribution of non-motorized versus motorized use? Do we have any data on that?
Yeah, Member Lambert, the EBER system is definitely one of our data points that we have. We always try to caution about overutilizing that data because it doesn't necessarily mean that is the boat split. We also look at facilities data. I would, this is my own personal opinion, some of the other staff might disagree. I would bet whenever we try to predict the number of non-motorized boaters in our state, we're under-predicting even when we think we're over-predicting, would be my guess. Even on the EBER system, and I like stories that go with data, when I talk to some of the law enforcement folks, they'll tell me their hardest part is at some point they almost have to put their blinders on to the non-motorized crowd to get out to the motorized crowd to start talking to them, because they could just spend their entire day reminding paddle boarders and kayakers to have life jackets and whistles and be safe and do all those things. And they said they almost just have to get to a point of like, if it's not an egregious safety violation, I need to go talk to some motorized as well. So that's a story that goes with the data. But when we try to look at the trends, the EBER data has actually been very helpful for us to try to get a feel for what's going on water bodies based on the contacts and percent of contacts.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just know down in Southern Oregon the amount of non-motorized use versus motorized use on some of the reservoirs down there has shifted exponentially to the non-motorized side. So I was a little surprised, but not surprised at those statistics.
Yeah.
Question on budget
Sure.
portion of it. Let me find the slide here real quick, if you don't mind. I noticed that, and maybe I'm just reading the graph wrong, because we've talked a lot about cash balance and ending fund balance predictions for the current fiscal year, et cetera. And I noticed at the end of the data that was supplied with the budget report, it shows that there's an actual ending fund balance, 6/30/2026, of 18,900, or sorry, that's thousands, 18,980, projected as 14,884. So I guess I'm just curious, after looking at some of this data that was compiled, we're halfway through the fiscal year. My question is, are we still on track for the deficit that we talked about when we were putting policy option packages together for the budget?
Member Lambert, at a very high level, yes. On track, both in a good way and in a unfortunately not so good way. We did get a little bump out of our fuel tax, which is going to help our overall ending balance. We had a new fuel tax study that came out a little better than we thought it would in terms of boater use, which is good. I think we're glad that that data was based on last year when gas prices were significantly less. I think this year with gas prices high, that survey wouldn't have come out a little better. So that's going to help us a little bit on our ending balance, but not enough to really change the needle in terms of the fee increase and those types of discussions.
Okay.
We also just, as we continue to get more data on the statewide costs that we get passed on to from enterprise, we had a bit of a surprise in that the DAS risk rates are going up significantly for our organization. Some of that's based on a new model that they're doing. Some of it's just based on the fact that lawsuits are getting more expensive. And so when you're part of a risk pool and states paying out bigger payouts, your part of that pie gets bigger too, whether it's hitting you directly or not. And so not dollar for dollar, but essentially the good news on the fuel tax sort of got eaten up by the bad news on the risk charges. So we're on track.
Okay.
But unfortunately not. We would have wished we would have come in better and could have softened that fee increase even a little more.
Okay. And then just a couple other things. Kudos to Ashley, PIO. Looks like she's retiring in October, so in the book. So worth mentioning. Long-time employee, getting ready to retire.
I really appreciated the large write-up about Ashley
Yeah.
and finding out a lot more about her entire contribution to the state.
Yeah, board members, I was laughing. I think I met Ashley when I worked at Teacher Standards, which would have been sometime between 2001 and 2005, and I would go to legislative briefing meetings, and Ashley was there for the Marine Board back then. So she's been around a long time.
Yeah. And last but not least, on that note, I noticed the progress that's being made on the website accessibility conversion and update process. I know that's a very difficult and frustrating process. The team who's working on that is doing a good job, and I just acknowledge them for working through that painful process, but much needed process.
Thank you, Member Lambert. It's been a big lift. It's a good cause, right, to make sure everything's accessible and everybody can get their documents from us. So, but it's taken a lot of work.
Yep. That's it.
All right, any other questions for Director Warren? Okay, so we're going to move on to item B, the Siletz River rulemaking. Alan?
Thank you, Chair Jackson.
We need just a technology second here, Alan.
Yep. Need to figure out what I'm gonna say. See what I got PowerPoint.
All right.
I'm gonna go relatively quickly because we've seen a lot of this information before. If at any time the board has questions, please feel free to stop me. So this is our review. Perfect. So current rule went in place in 1988, which prohibits jet boats above Jack Morgan Park. And we received 3 petitions in the past 25 years. And then we received the current petition in February 2025. The petition was submitted by the Confederate Tribes and Siletz Indians, and this is the basis of what they're requesting their rule. Again, I'm going quickly because I'm sure you've seen all of this many a time. Since the last board meeting, the board held their public hearing, your work session, along with the public comment period. We also had a public hearing. And we'll kind of go over some of the highlights of that in a minute. Then the voting facilities, we've included all those, they haven't changed. There's the map. Ebert's data hasn't changed. So our authority under ORS 183-175, we're doing this under this provision, which allows us to make rules related to trying to look at the right language. It's essentially to avoid conflict. So this is a new area that we are talking about. Last board meeting in Tillamook, we had a lot of the guides comment on the fiscal impact in the rule statement. And we had said there's minimal fiscal impact, and after the confusion of that meeting and the comments of that meeting, we wanted to go back and clarify. So what we learned in the RAC is a certain number of fishermen fish the Siletz on a regular basis. The individual guides who provide those guiding services, if they have a motor, they typically can carry 3 clients in the boat. A lot of them stated that if they weren't able to use the motors, they would only be able to carry 2 clients. And that would impact the income. Am I not speaking in the microphone?
Yeah, we're gonna try to just put it in the right spot for you there, Alan. Since you're talking towards the board, which is great. Let's see if we can get the mic over here a little bit. Let's try that.
Is that better, Jennifer? Okay, is this better?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that.
We're all learning, Alan.
Yeah. So, based on that comment, what we had heard is individual guides, it will change their income because of potentially change their income based on the number of clients they can carry. But what we also learned is there's non-motorized guides that have chosen not to use the river because of the motorized guides. And if we limit the ability for guides to use motors, and those guides would operate less, we would have additional guides come in. And we didn't hear any indication that the number of fishermen would change. And so, yes, individual guides will be impacted. If they're non-motorized, they have the potential to increase their income on the Siletz River. And if they're motorized, there's potential their income would decrease. But because the number of fishermen, as far as we know, will remain consistent, the impact to the community should stay roughly the same. And so we just wanted to clarify that that's the reason we said no significant change, no fiscal impact.
Alan, this was what we talked about at the work session as well, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, it hasn't changed since then?
No.
Okay.
No, I just wanted, because this is the board meeting, I wanted to make sure it was on the board meeting record.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I did talk about it at the work session. So, public comment. We've had, this is a sneak peek at my slides here. We've had lots of opportunity to receive public comment. So as you know, when we received the petition, we submitted for public comment before we presented to the board to open rulemaking. Once the petition's accepted, we're open to public comment. During that period, we also had the work session. We also had the public hearing. And when we filed the amended notice of rulemaking to update the fiscal impact, we added an additional 20 days for the public comment period. And so we've seen, and I know you've seen all the public comments, and there are significant comments. Just a summary, people in support of the motorized ban, align very much with what the petition requested, and that's erosion, sedimentation, habitat, safety for non-motorized boats, unfair advantage for fishing, ease of the heavy use of the boats, and we also heard a lot of comment, it wasn't in the petition, but some of the historic tribal activity that interferes with. The opposition, their general argument was there's really no conflict. And just for the record, this is my assessment of the comments received. This is not my opinion of what's right or what's correct. They say that motors aren't harming the environment. Motors have been used for generations. Some individuals aren't capable of rowing, so we're removing access. We do that. There was also comments about the ability to fund facility improvements. So those were the general comments received, and I wanted to kind of look through the ADA Act to make sure the board understands what we're required to do under ADA and what we're not required to do under ADA. So the ADA, for boating facilities, and they have a specific section on boating facilities. And what it says is you have to have accessible routes between facility elements. So from parking to restrooms to the top of the boat ramp. There is an exemption where there's a slope requirement, a water-dependent slope requirement. So, the boat ramp does not have to comply with ADA rules. If you had the ramp to a floating dock, that dock will rise and fall with water levels. That's not subject to ADA. And the ADA steps in when we're going to do an improvement to a boating facility. So I don't know if all the current facilities meet with current ADA standards, but we talked about like Old Mill Park that we're looking at doing improvements. When and if we do those improvements, we will have to comply with ADA. As far as accessibility and loading onto a boat, in the context of recreational boaters, and that includes guides, there is no ADA requirements for how clients get in and out of boats. If it was like a commercial ferry, a cruise ship, those would apply, but in the select scenario, there are currently no ADA rules that address accessing the boat.
So it's safe to say then, Alan, because this topic came up a lot in the public comments, I just want to make sure I understand it correctly. None of us are, I was going to say none of us are lawyers, but none of us are lawyers for the Marine Board.
Yes.
My understanding of accessibility requirements through ADA, that as you presented it, is any new facilities that are being constructed have to meet current ADA regulations. But access, experiences on different sections of the river, not everything has to be accessible in regards to actually using the facility, the river itself, not the facilities to access or unload. And let me give you an example. If that was the case and every river mile in the state of Oregon had to be, be usable by people who may be experiencing disabilities, then it would probably be safe to say that, for example, Mount Hood would have to have an accessible route all the way to the summit as well, correct?
So, Member Lambert, this is just kind of my regular disclosure.
Yeah.
I'm not an ADA expert.
Yeah.
I'm not representing the Marine Board to say this is the compliance requirements with ADA, but my understanding is, we don't need to go through smooth the river out, straighten corners, build an elevator up to the top of Mount Hood. The wild experiences are not required to follow ADA accessibility rules.
Yeah, correct. All right, thank you.
So at the last board meeting, we have the current rule that can't use a jet pump above Morgan Park boat ramp. The board approved the proposed rule language. Excuse me, not not sure, Director Warren, how to correctly say this. They voted on the proposed rule language. It doesn't go into effect, but that proposed rule language was no person shall use a motor in excess of 15 horsepower and in excess of a slow no wake speed between Jack Morgan Park and Old Mill Park boat ramp. Then above Old Mill Park boat ramp, there's no motors are allowed. No motors are allowed to be used. And then on all tributaries upstream of Jack Morgan Park, there's no motor use on the tributaries. So that's the proposed rule we have. Let me back up because I did want to say more on the comments. So the board had the opportunity to do the public hearing, and you were there, so I don't think I need to review the comments there. What I did want to review is we've had a long public comment period, and just kind of a recap of those public comments. So I went through last week and looked at how many comments were received. What was interesting is we had 72 commenters oppose the motor ban. We had 20 people support the motor ban, and we had 7 people actually discuss the hybrid option or the proposed rules, which historically we haven't seen a lot of comments directed at those proposed rules. 6 people were in favor, 1 didn't like it. We also had 2 legislators comment, Rep. Boyce and Rep. Mannix. And so I did want to say, while this written comment was heavily used by those in opposition, I would still say that generally the opposition and support was fairly well balanced. So I wouldn't say there was a landslide in one way or the other. So I think we look at the comments, understand the content of the comments, and then you guys can make your decision based on the content. And I wouldn't recommend saying that one party, or there's more people adamantly opposed or more people in support. So it's still relatively even. So the staff recommendation at this time is that we continue with the proposed rule language and make that a final rule. We did hear comments, and if the board would like some different options, these are potential options, but we're not recommending that the board accept those or reject those. That's entirely up to the board. But what we heard, a lot of people didn't think that Old Mill was the right deadline location. We heard people say that that deadline should be Jack Morgan. We also heard people say that it should be moved up to LE. We also received comments that we lower the horsepower from 15 to 10, and that's generally based on what we understand is there's more drift boats that use the Selettes, and the staff came up with the 15 horsepower rule because that's what was used on the Rogue. But we do recognize on the Rogue there was more flat bottom boats or skiff type boats, and so 15 is fine, 10 would also be fine. I do want to note that because we also have the slow no wake speed in the rule, the horsepower is relatively unimportant in this context because any boat will only be able to operate at the speed necessary to maneuver. And then finally, we had a suggestion that we could change the effective date of the rule to lessen the impact on guides. So the fishing season for salmon is generally August 1st to December 31st. And the start date is generally based on when the rains come down and so when boats are able to access the river. And then steelhead, the deadline for the salmon fishing is Illahee Park. And then steelhead is year-round. So typically that's flow dependent. So generally people are fishing for salmon during the salmon season, then following the salmon season, they'll switch over to steelhead as long as flows allow. And so delaying the rule would just give the guides an opportunity to change bookings if they have bookings that far in advance.
Can I ask you a question, Alan?
Yes.
The 10 horsepower, you mentioned that maybe, I think you said one of the reasons was we had that to be consistent with the rules that we recently passed on the road.
Yes.
In reviewing a bunch of the coastal river rules over the past couple of days, it seems like that 15 horsepower restriction is also very consistent with a bunch of the rivers on the coast, not just the road, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so, okay. I wanted to make sure that that wasn't a special one just for the rogue. It seems to be generally the horsepower restriction for many of the rivers in the state.
Yeah.
And Member Lambert, I would just say that the staff recommendations are almost always going to go back to 10 horse, and we acknowledge that the board typically has picked 15 horse, and that just goes back to the Coast Guard not allowing legally 15 horses on drift boats because they're not required to have flotation. The Coast Guard has made a special rule that they don't have to have the flotation, but then they're limited to 10 horse. Staff would also acknowledge that we understand that if you go to the river, there's a lot of drift boats with 15 horse motors on them.
Yeah.
But just, we always feel like as staff, to be consistent with the Coast Guard, we're always going to recommend probably the 10, and we also acknowledge that the board has traditionally picked 15, just out of, I think, acknowledgement that there's a lot of 15 horses on drift boats.
Do you anticipate if a change was made from a 15 to a 10 and 10 kind of started becoming the standard across the state for these types of restrictions, do you anticipate that being an issue for law enforcement, confusion or enforcement or anything?
Member Lambert, let's go ahead and ask Brian Paulson to come up just to make sure we're covering this accurately for you.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Lambert, if I understood your question, if we go with 10 horsepower on the Sluts River with the staff recommendation, with the 15 horsepower traditionally been used in the past, would this cause inconsistencies in enforcement? Was that what I?
Yeah. We talk a lot about the ease of enforceability and helping our law enforcement partners, and we would be switching from a 15 to a 10 horsepower model. I'm just curious if you anticipate that being an issue or point of confusion.
Our law enforcement partners enforce the 10 horsepower because when a drift boat has an outboard engine greater than 10 horsepower, then it's one of those 7 conditions that we can terminate a voyage based on statute and rule because it's overpowering. And so they're going to enforce the 10 horsepower. In the past, staff recommendations have been the 10 horsepower because that aligns with federal law. That also aligns with what our law enforcement partners enforce. So we as staff wouldn't want to promote 15 horsepower on drift boats. However, it is worth noting that potentially somebody could be out there in a smaller boat, maybe not a drift boat, that has a greater capacity than 10 horsepower. So that would be anecdotally the other piece. It could be a boat out there that's not a drift boat and have capacity up to 15 horsepower.
Perfect clarification. Thank you, Brian.
And again, apologies for the mic stuff. We're finding as staff, we like to look at you when we talk to you, but then we like to look at the screen, and we're driving Jennifer nuts over here. So we're getting some feedback because we have some mics cranked up. We're working on it.
And thank you,
Can I ask
Jennifer,
one question?
for managing this. Member Wild has a question. Go ahead.
Alan, I was just wondering if you could explain a little bit further. When you just mentioned the deadline of salmon being at Illahee, is that the deadline for where you're allowed to fish, or is there a different distinction that the word deadline means?
Sorry, we're getting some feedback here.
I can hear it too.
There we go. I'll put the mic much closer
That's better.
Ellen, I think the question is a confusion in matter of terminology. Deadline a lot of us think of deadline as being like a time or a date or whatever. But I think in this case, deadline is actually meaning a boundary line.
Yes, that is correct, Chair Jackson. The boundary line for salmon fishing is Illahee Boat Ramp.
To where people are allowed to salmon fish up to that point on the river.
Yes, they're allowed to fish downstream of Illahee for salmon. And upstream,
got it.
salmon is closed.
Okay, that's what I wanted to understand. Thank you.
Because during the work session, I was starting to get confused between deadline meaning the end of the season and deadline meaning the end of the zone where you can fish.
Yeah, generally ODF&W uses the terminology of deadline to define a boundary.
Okay.
So,
Are you finished with your presentation or do you have more?
so I think now is the time for the board to decide what they would like to do, and then let me just go one slide up. So if the board approves a rule, we'll file it with the Secretary of State, and depending on what the board decides, we can set the effective date different than the filing date. Then staff will go out, provide education signage, and then at the 1 year time frame. And the reason we're putting this in here is on the road, we had a lot of confusion on what the 1 year review does. They thought that the board would have the opportunity to essentially renew the rule. That's not the case. Staff will look at the effectiveness of implementation and identify if there's any problems. If staff recommends that somehow the rule didn't meet the intent that we would want a recommendation, we would have to reopen rulemaking. So this will just be a report to the board for information only. The board may direct us to put more signs up or further increase education efforts, but it will not automatically change any rules.
Okay, thank you.
But yes, now the board's free to deliberate as they see fit.
Okay, so before we actually start deliberating, does anybody have any questions for Alan?
Chair Jackson.
Go ahead.
Before I engage in discussions related to the Siletz River, I need to disclose a potential conflict of interest. I'm a licensed fishing guide, however, I do not guide on the Siletz River.
Thank you, Member Messett. Can we go to the screen back where I can see Member Wild? So if she has any questions, so I can actually see her raising her hand or. I do have one question based on sort of the next steps. So if we were to choose a implementation date, not ASAP, but say January 1, the education and the signage and stuff would still be the process of education and public service announcements, that kind of stuff, would start ASAP?
That's correct, Chair Jackson. We'll put, if there is an effective date, we'll include that in the education material, but we would move forward with notifying the public.
Okay, thank you. Member Wild, do you have any questions since I can't see you?
I don't have any questions right this second, but I think it would be good to talk about the implications of some of the options that are on the table.
Would you like to start?
Sure. I guess my biggest thing in reviewing all of the public comment and also listening to the different presenters, both at the work party and previous board meetings, is the distinction point and the access point if we're talking about Old Mill, being that as that goes into effect, if the rule were to go into effect in that sense, the current situation at Old Mill Park might not be able to accommodate the boating traffic for guides and for motorized boats. So I know we had also heard from Janine about the infrastructure and the needs that would need to be improved there. And I'm wondering if that could be included in some sort of rulemaking to, improve the facility in some shape or form. I'm not sure how. If we are going to use Old Mill as a distinction point, and if we do go ahead and, create a distinction here.
Can I comment?
Go ahead.
Yeah, just to Member Wild's comment, I fully agree that we heard loud and clear from many folks at the work session over the condition of the Old Mill site. So I would like to maybe hear a little bit from Janine, a little recap on that facility there and what options might be available for us as a board as we move forward with this, because I think using that as an ending point seems to make perfect sense to me, especially as we have this kind of town loop that is a great opportunity for people to put in at one location and take out another location just a couple blocks away from each other. But I would feel that if we, as a board, decided to use that Old Mill site, there would need to be some pretty immediate improvements made there.
Agreed.
Yep.
Agreed.
So, Janine, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah. For the record, I'm Janine Black. I'm the Boating Facilities Program Manager. As previously mentioned to the board, staff have been working with the city to develop a replacement of the boat ramp, repair of the access road, creation of some accessible parking in the lower level, and adding sanitation. So right now we are kind of pushing up against a window. The road work and the lower area needs to be done in the driest time of year. We don't want to be cutting that open when it is wet and unstable. So we're really at a critical point that if we're going to try to do it this year, we would need to move very quickly. And that is, the city would have to rebid, we'd have to finalize the design. And the permitting piece, it would also be to have the city move forward with the permits for the boat ramp replacement. So it could be done, but the next grant cycle that the board would consider is in October. And at that point, the work couldn't happen until the new biennium. And there is some uncertainty with the budget package on whether or not we would have, how much money we would have for grant funding to delay that. So if the board wanted to provide a delegated authority to Larry to approve grant funding out of cycle to address some emergency aspects, we could work with the city and others to try to get some things implemented from a safety aspect and significantly advance the permits, which would put the city in a good position to do the in-water work portions and some of the other upland stuff for the next biennium.
Thank you.
Can I ask another follow-up question?
You may.
How much funding do you think would need to be set aside for that?
I'm estimating no more than, let's say, $500,000, but it could be smaller. It depends on how fast the city could move with the bidding process and how fast we could get the design finalized. I definitely feel very confident in the permitting aspect moving forward. And it could be ordering some materials like pre-ordering the vault toilet for a delivery date. So there could be some things done ahead of time that could lessen the financial impact to the grant program next biennium as well.
And is the city in a position in your discussions with them to provide any sort of match?
The city has very limited resources, but they have also done some pre-agreement work that we have acknowledged in writing that would be applied for a construction phase. They've also let me know that the Siletz Anglers Association has provided them a check for, I believe it was $50,000. And we have had discussions with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and it is likely that they would also have some federal funding that could be used as match.
Great.
Thank you. Pretty much the same questions I was going to ask. Is that $500,000, is that all us, or is that us plus matches?
It could be, it's at really the board's discretion. We will work within whatever the financial limit is. The entire project will be more than 500,000, but this would definitely let the city get through the permit process and put them in a good place, and we could buy some materials and do some improvements.
One follow-up. So just to confirm, the city is the owner of the property,
Yes,
and the city is committed to moving forward with an improvement project there.
they are very committed.
Okay. That's good. I appreciate Member Wild asking that question just from my perspective, because as I look at this situation, you know, I mean, there's a lot of access points along this section of river. I don't necessarily want us to make a decision that's best for the river and use of the river based off the facility condition at one location versus the other, when that facility can be fixed, can be upgraded by our amazing facilities team that we see is doing good work all over the state. So I personally trust that the concerns that have been raised about the condition of the old mill site can and will be addressed by our facilities team and our partner if we were to move forward in that direction.
And I also looking at it in terms of opportunities presented by the town loop, not only during the fishing season, during the winter and early spring, fall, winter, and early spring, but improvements to Mill Park can also facilitate somebody being a little bit entrepreneurial and starting a summertime business of float trips, doing the town loop and creating a shuttle and float thing there. But definitely has to improve the conditions at Mill Park to make that happen. So thank you, Janine, for clarifying that. Are there any other questions for Janine or Ellen?
I have one other
Member
question for
Wild?
Janine. Janine, just to understand timelines a bit more, because as I'm new to this role on the board, and maybe other people too, in terms of understanding government timelines and processing, even if it were to be an accelerated process between the city and the other agencies, what do you think an estimated time in years to having the improved facilities there that are usable? Like, or maybe what's a normal timeline, and then what would be the goal of a fast timeline in this situation?
Yeah, so the boat ramp has to happen during an approved in-water work window, and it does take permits. Advancing funds to help the city go through the permit process would put them in a very good position to be able to replace the boat ramp in 27, at the latest 28.
Okay.
And the upland piece, portions of it could happen before the wet weather sets in, but there will also be portions that would happen in conjunction with the boat ramp work.
To clarify, the upland portions that could happen before the wet weather in 26?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so that was quick. Given what we saw when we went and visited the boat ramp now, say there were to be a rule implemented at this location, because we did notice that there's a big section of the boat ramp that, depending on water levels, there could be a big drop off there. Is that going to drastically affect people for the upcoming season? And is it feasible to continue using it as it is right now?
So the primary fishing season is in late fall and winter when the water is higher. So
Okay.
the likelihood of somebody backing down over the edge is significantly reduced. We can work with the city to look at installing a marker of some sort that indicates how much of the boat ramp remains before that hole to help provide guidance for folks who may not be familiar with the site. And that would be the strategy for this current upcoming season year.
And just adding on top of that, because I was only there once this last winter, the boat trailer parking spot, roughly how many trailers would be able to be parked there? Do you have an idea?
Yeah, so the upper parking area is gravel, and we would have some wheel stops to help show people the spaces that they should park in. I believe you can get about 5 there, and then the lower area, when that work can be done, there'll be some ADA accessible parking spaces. And then we'll work with the city to have a sign that has a map, some directions, so folks who are not familiar know where the overflow parking is near City Hall. And that way they can walk and drop off cars. The city works fairly well with the guide community, and I'm sure they could work with them to have guide clients park off the site so that trailers can be there to help reduce some of the congestion as well.
And I don't have the map right in front of me, but roughly how far would that walk be from City Hall to, or like the overflow parking to back to their boat at Old Mill?
Yeah, I want to say it's about a 15-20 minute walk. It's about the same difference from Illahi as well as Mill Park there. I don't have it in front of me, but it was part of the grant presentation during the work session with a Google Earth map and distance.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah, I vaguely remember some people saying it was depending on how fast you were moving, 10, 15 minutes.
And in comparison to the Illahi, remember how many spots are currently there?
There's very few trailer spaces. Majority of the spaces are single cars, which is why the city made the overflow area was one, to keep people off the highway and off the main road, blocking businesses, and to help with that use.
Yeah, because the numbers you mentioned were on the lower end, but the other site that's been proposed didn't really have room for expansion to create a bunch more spaces either. So they're both facing the same kind of challenges as far as capacity.
Yes.
Any other questions?
I have one for Alan. Do we need to add an item D for law enforcement and search and rescue stipulation that they are allowed to use gas-powered motors?
So in the water body specific rules, the first rule is that essentially says that public entities are exempt from all the rules. So we already have that provision in rule.
Okay.
And so that applies to all water bodies in the state.
Any other questions? So I think the next point is, do we have a motion on whether we want to adopt a rule and what that rule might be?
I guess if I can jump in, sorry, I just jumped in. I just want to make it known to the folks that are out there how much I appreciate their engagement in this process on both sides. And really not both sides, there's multiple sides, all sides of this issue. It's really important to me to hear from the public, to whether that's through writing, whether that's through work sessions and public hearings, and whether that's just through testimony at the various board meetings. I know it takes a very long time for some of these processes. We've heard frustrations from some of the guides on how long this process takes and their commitment to coming from meeting to meeting, when they're not being paid to do so. And I realize that, and I fully acknowledge it, and I appreciate their engagement in that. And I appreciate the petitioners' engagement as well, and we've heard that same frustration from there. I will say the same thing that I said when we sat on trying to make a really tough decision on the Rogue River. This is a really challenging position to be in for the 4 people that signed up for this responsibility in regards to making a decision that affects multiple users, no matter what decision you make, and somebody's going to be frustrated with that position. But in this situation, I've heard that there's no conflict. I tend to disagree pretty strongly with that. I think a river, such as the Rogue River, and we'll take it to the Siletz River now, that has a history of repeated petitions. I don't think those petitions are being submitted just for the sake of well, one day the board's going to agree with us and one day we'll get what we want. I think those petitions are being submitted because there is legitimate and actual conflict. And, you know, some portions of the petition, the environmental portions and whatnot, you know, when I review this and I think about this over the last year and a half, I'm not thinking about it from that perspective as much, because that really doesn't fall within the board's purview and board's perspective unless, you know, ODF&W asks us or directs us to do something, which was the case on the Rogue River. So my decision in you know, what I've been thinking about in this particular incident or incidents is specific to the conflict. And I just think there is conflict there, and conflict is occurring between these different types of uses and different types of, you know, boats. I think when the jet propulsion limit was put into place, that was a long time ago, and I think things have changed. Some of the things that have been most impactful for me are seeing some of the videos of these high-powered propeller-driven boats going up and down the river, and I think it's hard to argue that some of those uses don't create conflict with other folks. I'm generally pretty averse to, you know, supporting or making decisions that are going to drastically affect people's use of a river, especially when some of these uses have been going on for generations. But in this situation, I personally think moving forward with a section of a river, much like we did on the Rogue, that seems to be working very well on that river, and folks are happy with that. I think that model has the potential to be applied here and be successful as well, where we just kind of start separating some of these uses. So the proposal that's been submitted by the staff, generally speaking, with regards to a horsepower restriction from Jack Morgan up to Old Mill and then non-motorized above that. I fully realize that that's impactful to folks, but I personally think that that's the right hard decision to make in this situation.
Thank you, Member Lambert. Similarly, in following this, I look at what my personal beliefs and passions and ethos are, and then look at what our charge is. And again, going back to the conflict, what we can do as a Marine Board, as opposed to if ODF&W asked us to do something for fish habitat or do something for that. And so it does come down to conflict, and agree that the videos and listening to some of the people talk about use of extremely high-powered motors up above Mill and Illahee does create conflict. It does possibly create safety issues for people, bank fishing, things like that. So again, I think also the proposal with a couple of minor changes is pretty close to what I think should happen out there. So with that, do we have a motion? Or would you like,
I'd like to add
Member
something, and I do agree with Chair Jackson, Member Lambert. I would like to talk about the possibility of allowing for electric motor use, whether it is up to Illahee or even above. I think we could talk about that possible as a possible compromise. I'm a fan of compromise, and I appreciate everything both members and Chair Jackson said. Can we talk about that a little bit?
and I believe Director Warren is signaling for one of the other staff people to come up.
Chair Jackson, you're correct.
All right, and
With a limit up to,
I think,
yeah,
didn't we
30.
hear, as that was one of the items that was maybe suggested by the SAA, was to have a certain, I can't remember what,
There's a thrust limit, I would say
But-
55-pound thrust, 36 volt.
there was, yeah,
battery.
30, I think they were talking about 36 volt.
Yes.
And I would also say, Alan, obviously, I think some of this got discussed too in some of the RAC process, and at the time was summarily dismissed by some of the participants that ultimately proposed. But maybe the both of you can talk about the process and just thoughts on that.
Good. So with the RAC process, you know, we looked at lots of different options as far as, you know, what was going to, if there was going to be a compromise. Individuals, we really, the use of electric motors really didn't float to the top as a compromise. A lot of the guides did not want to talk about anything but full motor use, and then a lot of the non-motor folks really were adamant about no motors above Jack Morgan Park. So we tried to vet that out more, but at the time, nobody seemed to be interested in coming up with a compromise that included distinguishing gas versus electric. And I think a lot of the argument too for no electric is it's the props that does the damage. And so what's powering the prop really is irrelevant. The damage is done by the propeller and the speed of the boat. And so, you know, unfortunately, you know, I would have liked to have explored that a little bit more, but the RAC members really weren't interested in discussing that option.
It would be hard for it to run an electric prop through a gravel tail out upriver. It's almost physically impossible. That's why I think it's a good compromise.
I agree, Member Messer, with that statement. I think the other piece, part of why I didn't ever get, I know Alan had tried to have that conversation in some of his early RAC conversations, is I think if we go back to the conflict element, like the conflict's born out of the ability to move back upstream and rerun and go through things. And so conflict exists whether you're going back upstream on an electric or going back upstream on gas. I think that was part of the reason it never got to be really elevated and discussed until what kind of felt like late hour throw after a year and a half process. But you know, Brian, if you want to talk at all about operation.
Yeah, no, so the,
Member Messon, I know you're a top-notch operator, so we're not going to explain anything that you don't know.
Chair Jackson, members of the board. So on electric motor operation on a drift boat, typically it's a transom mount electric motor that's on a bow mount, like on typical open motor boats. They come in 12 volt, 24 volt, or 36 volt. Typically at 12 volts accompanied by like a 55-pound thrust. And then you have approximately 75, 78-pound thrust. That's a 24 volt system. And then it goes up to 36 volt, which is around 100 to 112 pound thrust. There's the weight of the batteries. You could even get a 36 volt single battery. You know, that's pretty lightweight. So there's technologies there. But the purpose of the trolling motor is exactly what they're doing with gas operations, in that they're repetitively going through holes, right? They're using them in areas that assimilates the same type of conflict that the gasoline engines are doing.
I will say, Member Messett, that I definitely heard that in the comments, this most couple past meetings where the comments where this, you know, push for, you know, a compromise for electric motors has come up. And that's kind of similar to what Director Warren and Brian mentioned. That's where my mind went, was if I'm stepping aside and I'm taking out the environmental impacts, because that's not necessarily in our purview as a board, and I'm strictly just applying the conflict layer to address the situation, to me, it doesn't seem like whether it's a gas-powered motor or an electric motor makes a difference. The conflict is still there. So that, personally, that's just where I was kind of landing with that portion of it.
And I agree with all that. A big part of the conflict with the gas motor is it's not just like going up and rerunning it, because that's going to be slower, especially in heavier water with the electric. There won't be quite as many passes. But I think a lot of the conflict, based on my experience, would be people putting in with a gas motor and motoring 3 miles upriver and low-holing other people coming down. You just can't do that with an electric motor. So it's a little less conflict with the electric, and that's why I brought it up as a possible compromise. The level is a little less, you know, combative, if you will. But I understand where it's coming from.
Thank you for your explanation.
Said like a true fisherman, Member Messer, we often don't like to admit that conflict's because somebody's getting to our spot first.
I don't want to define low-holing, but yeah.
But the only other comment I would make is, and we heard this from some of the folks providing testimony too about a compromise. I feel, I mean, the original petition was to ban motors from Jack Morgan up.
Yep.
So I view the staff recommended and the board recommended, you know, for us to be able to kind of look at over the past couple months, draft rule as a compromise, because it's not a full closure to motors above Jack Morgan. So personally, at least.
Well, having been out there in December above Illahee and looking at just how shallow it is, as you kind of mentioned before, it's not the power source, it's the prop. And so it was kind of interesting in terms of looking at, because those motors are still a smaller horsepower than the 15, but it's still basically the prop that's causing the problem. So, yeah. So any other questions, comments?
Chair
I have
Jackson,
a question.
Go ahead.
Me? Okay.
Member Wild.
Thank you. Just one implication of the timeline, because I am a bit concerned about well, first of all, I do agree that some sort of compromise is the best solution, because there are so many incredibly passionate parties that get to work and recreate on this river, and it needs to be acknowledged that so many people have spent a lot of their time and energy and effort, not only coming to meetings, but making presentations and really working together. So as you know, this being my first term on the board, I certainly do appreciate everybody's insights and education, because it's difficult to make a decision when it's not your everyday lived experience. And so I certainly appreciate everybody's insights and their time. That being said, looking at some sort of compromise, Old Mill has become, in a way, the distinction point. With the fall season approaching very quickly, and the fact that, hearing from Janine that there could potentially, and, not to stick everything on Janine, because that would be rude. But, with the potential of significant upgrades to the facility happening in a relatively short period of time, it sounds like, without overwhelming a facility that might not be able to handle the scale of, boats and trailers and people within a short season, is it possible to delay the implication of the rule until, say, after the, fall salmon run, but still have the process and urgency of working on facility improvements go forward within the current rules as stated?
Chair Jackson, members of the board, Member Wild, absolutely. If the board elected to, for instance, delay till January 1, we staff, if at the direction of the board, would still go full forward on the facilities and the education and all of those things. We don't need to wait for one to happen for the other. And also, Member Wild, don't ever feel bad about putting everything on Janine. That's what we do too. She always comes through.
Oh, poor Janine.
Thank you, Director Warren. I also want to add in about the delay of implementation. We're sitting here in August, it's August 1st, and October 1st is 2 months away. And I don't know if Member Messett's experience is, but I'm guessing that folks have booked trips with the guides for October and November. So that's like less than 90 days for the folks that guide on that river to essentially accommodate a new policy. So I would support also, because Mill probably can't accommodate that change fully right now, to delay the implementation, but also basically as a courtesy to the folks who earn their living on this river to delay the implementation.
I would say delay it even further, because winter steelhead trips are already booked already as well.
Okay.
That would be devastating to have to cancel winter steelhead season for those folks.
Can you give us a
March
date?
31st,
Okay.
would you say, Brian? March 31st? On the Celeste?
Member Messett, the bulk of the season is definitely going to be February,
Okay,
March.
yeah.
I think water levels are the biggest driver of when you have the most amount of angling activity and guiding on that specific water.
No. I think we should definitely consider that and recognize that.
Is there a way to pull up and keep Member Wild on the screen, but pull up the proposed language with the options, that the slide that Alan had shared, so we can all look at those?
While we work on that, Member Lambert, I was just going to mention to the board that one of the things that has not gotten discussed much is the language that you'll see is the addition of the tributaries. And in the past, the tributaries of this river probably wouldn't have been the biggest concern from a boating perspective, but there are a lot of boating technology changes that have happened with different, commonly referred to as mini jets, that while we haven't experienced those problems in the sleds, they certainly are ripe for that. So that's an area where staff saw an opportunity to get further protections and kind of avoid some future problems and acknowledge the original petition and its goals were to protect that waterway. So we haven't talked about that tributary piece much just because it hasn't been a problem area, but we have seen it in other rivers. So just wanted to call that out as an acknowledgement of the work
Thank
we've
you.
done.
Director Warren, so that would be item C. Is there any fish and game help with that? Like you can't fish within, let's say, 100 feet of the entrance of a tributary?
Member Messett, I know there's none of those type of well, I shouldn't say I know that for a fact, but I believe there's nothing like that now, and I would say that would solely be a decision based on Fish and Wildlife and their work, not ours.
Okay, just calling them out a little bit for things like that.
So. Again, what sometimes feels like a simple request.
We need a second projector screen.
Hey, it's kind of there, look at that.
It's okay if I end up small. I don't mind. I can talk up if you really.
You can still yell, right?
Yes.
Well, I guess the reason I was asking was, Chair Jackson's asked a couple times for a motion, and I think it would be nice to just kind of look at the proposed rule, talk about a couple additions, and then maybe make a motion, which I agree with.
I figured that's where you were going. Remember.
And the other thing that we haven't talked about is the 10 horsepower versus the 15 horsepower, if we want to stay with that versus reducing it to a 10. If I heard you guys right, staff's recommendation is to go to a 10 to align with the Coast Guard? Is that what?
Member Lambert, those were options we heard. We're not making a recommendation to change that. We just wanted to present that some requests were for lowering the horsepower limit. So staff is comfortable with the 15. Staff is also comfortable with the 10 if the board chooses to go that direction.
Well, maybe I'll put Director Warren on the spot. Well, I'm sorry in advance, but I thought I heard you say the staff's recommendation will always be to align with the Coast
So
Guard.
Member Lambert, Alan said it more correctly than I did, which we're
Okay.
comfortable with both.
You're
And
comfortable with both.
Part of the reason we normally say it that way is because we acknowledge that the board has traditionally picked 15 for
Got
us.
it.
So
Okay.
just know when we talk about it internally, staff tends to talk about the 10 horse as being a priority, but
Got it.
and you made a point about regulatory confusion, and to your point, we've almost always landed on 15 horse. So.
Yeah, okay.
And I think if you're not allowed to kick a wig, it doesn't matter if it's 10 or 15, so keeping it the way it is.
Yeah.
That way some people don't have to go buy a new motor
Yeah.
if they have a 15.
Yeah.
Well, because there are people that aren't drift boaters that use the higher powered motor.
Yeah.
So I think it's fair to, like you say, don't make them go buy a new motor.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the rule on screen, the proposed rule.
So I'll just jump in and say, from what I'm hearing, it seems like the majority of board members are amenable to the proposed rule as written, with the caveat of a effective date and the caveat of directing staff to work with the city to make some improvements at Old Mill.
Right.
Is that correct?
That's my direction of lean. So I guess this is probably a question for Alan. In terms of the rule language that we adopt, essentially what's on the screen, and then the implementation date and direction to charge ahead with improving Old Mill Park is a second item, not part of the rulemaking, but a direction to staff. So it would be like a second motion.
Chair Jackson, what I think would be appropriate from a rule standpoint is we can add the effective date into the rule language. We typically don't see directions as far as improvements in the actual rules.
Okay.
And so I think that would probably be an order directed to staff to move forward, and that does not need to be in rule language.
Okay. So I would like to make a motion that we adopt the proposed rule language with an added item D with an effective date of March 31st, 2027.
March 31st, 2027? Is that what you said?
March next year.
March, the end of March.
End of March next year.
I will second that.
So we have a motion and a second. Do we have any further discussion? Member Wild, I cannot see you, so if you have something to say.
Just ensuring that along with it, the not recommendation, but the request of the staff to get the process going within feasible means, to make sure that the facilities can accommodate the change. That would be the request.
And as Ellen said, that would be a separate item from the actual room language.
Chair Jackson, I don't know that it needs to be a separate ruling, but it wouldn't be included in the rule language.
Okay. So I guess it would be the proposed language plus item D and a direction to staff to go ahead and accelerate as much as they can the process to improve Old Mill Park.
Yes.
So we have a motion and a second. Do we have any further discussion?
I think I would like to be more specific. If we're going to do it all in one motion, which I misunderstood you as well. I originally misunderstood as two different motions. But if we're going to do it all in one motion, I would, a motion to approve the rural language as permitted, as proposed with the effective date of March 31st, 2027, and direction to staff to work with the city on developing a solution for the Orb Mill site, and authorization for the director to award up to $500,000 of state facility boating funds to move forward with that project without having to come back to the board. That way that process could get going and not have to wait till an October board meeting.
I'm not sure I can re-speak that as a motion, but what Member Lambert said.
If you guys feel I need to restate it a little clearer, feel free to tell me.
We're good.
Okay, so we have a motion, a second, and an additional staff direction. Is there any further comments, questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the proposed language with the effective date of March 31st, 2027, and the language that Member Lambert proposed as a direction to staff, we're going to do a roll call. So Jennifer, would you call the roll?
Member Wild,
Aye.
Member Messett,
Aye.
Member Lambert,
Aye.
Chair Jackson.
Aye. Okay, the motion passes. Thank you, everybody in the public and the agencies that came out and testified. Thank you, staff, for your great work in leading all of these meetings. We've been at this for about an hour and a half right now. I would like to take about a 10-minute break, and we'll come back and talk about aquatic invasive species and the rest of the agenda.
Thank you.
Give me the sign, Jennifer. All right, we are back. And we're going to move on to our agenda item C, the invasive species program update. Go ahead.
So I realized I didn't do this. For the record, I'm Alan Hansen, the Policy and Environmental Manager for the Oregon State Marine Board. Oh, good, they got my slides. So June 6th, we had a little bit of an invasive species scare. There was a single adult quagga mussel found at Prineville Reservoir. And let me kind of tell you the story. So a boat came up from California and was stopped at the Ashland check station. They found mussels on it. And my understanding is it's a family in Oregon that owns the boat, but they store it in California. And so ODF&W did some investigation to understand where that boat came from and where it's used. And for the record, there's no connection between that boat and the mussel that was found. We have no evidence to say that that was the boat that planted the mussel, but they're part of the story because when ODF&W interviewed them, they found out that they boated at Lake Billy Chinook and Prineville Reservoir and some additional high mountain lakes. But so that triggered ODF&W to request Portland State University to go investigate Prineville Reservoir. And so when Portland State got there, they found a single adult quagga mussel on the beach. And so that triggered our emergency response and all sorts of investigation. So PSU investigated about a mile of shoreline. They did investigation of all the docks at the boat ramps with the help of Brian and his staff. They coordinated with the sheriff's office to pull the sheriff's boats to see if there was any mussel growth on the boats. There's 2 floating restrooms. They looked at those. They brought in U.S. Fish and Wildlife scuba divers to investigate in the water, part of the dam face, part of the lines for the docks and the floating restrooms. And there's no indication found to date that there was any other mussels other than that one adult. PSU also does veliger trolls, which is basically a big net where they try and capture microscopic veligers. Veliger is a early life stage of the mussels, and they're free floating in the water. And they can also do eDNA, which just detects the presence of mussel DNA in the water. Everything came back negative. So to date, we have no indication that there's additional mussels in the Prineville Reservoir other than the one sample found. We don't know how it got there, whether it was by a boat, by a bird, by somebody, picked it up somewhere and threw it in the water. It was just there. And here's a map of Prineville Reservoir. So on the lower left-hand corner is Bowman Dam, and then Powder House Cove is where they actually found the mussel. Prineville State Park is more in the center of the screen. I apologize, this is a poor map. Blowing it up made it a little fuzzy. It's an unusual place. I don't think that's the most popular boat ramp on the reservoir. So we have no indication of how, why it got there. But we are continuing to investigate. So they're going to, ODF&W and Portland State are going to continue with bi-weekly monitoring of both Prineville Reservoir and Lake Billy Chinook. Some of the high mountain lakes that this boater used aren't as much of a concern because a lot of what controls the amount of infestation that's possible is the water chemistry and the presence, I believe it's calcium, so that the mussels can develop shells, don't exist in the high mountain lakes. So they're very low risk for the development of mussels, where Billy Chinook and Prineville are much higher risk. So that's where the detection focus is going to continue. Washington State has sniffing dogs. ODF&W are going to employ those. There's underwater drones. We're going to continue to deploy those as well.
Dogs can do anything.
Dogs can do anything. They're amazing
That's so
creatures.
cool.
Maybe I gotta find a new job for mine.
Yeah. So far, it's a little bit scary that this was detected, but there's no indication that we have an infestation in Oregon. Talking to Glenn, who's the mussel expert on the staff, he said similar event happened in Utah a couple years ago, and they found one mussel, and they've continued to monitor, and there's been no infestation and no additional mussels. So we're hopeful that's the case here, but we're still sampling, and we're still taking the risk very seriously. So that's all we know. And so if you have any questions, hopefully I can answer some.
Okay. Any questions for Alan?
I have a question just from what is the state's plan for if they do find more mussels? What are the next steps? Because I've read some stuff online that, the lake could be closed to boating.
There's an AIS team that's composed of ODF&W. Glenn is on that team. The Invasive Species Council is part of that, but we have a rapid response plan, and so that was activated. And I haven't read the plan, but it's in draft form today. They use that plan on this incident, and my last paragraph is they're going to be reviewing that plan again in the fall and take any lessons learned from this incident incorporated before it's finalized. But essentially what it is if we find something, we're going to shut down the lake to all boating access, and, do a full investigation of assessment, where the mussels are, what the incident is, and then, in Idaho, they found mussels in the Snake River. They were able to treat that, and by treat I mean essentially fill the water body with poison and kill everything in the water body, which, depending on where it is, that might be an option in Oregon. Our concern is if we see something in the Snake River or in the Columbia River where we have salmon, can't say that word, we wouldn't be able to do that. And so if they hit the Columbia, it's something we're probably going to have to live with. The potential effects are any water users like irrigation districts, municipal drinking water, their maintenance costs are going to be extremely high because, as the mussels get a stronghold, they can clog pipes in the matter of months or, every couple of years. Those entities drawing water out of the water body will have to replace piping or clean piping. If it's a dam, same issue. The mussels can come in and clog some of the dam components, and so the cost will be included in irrigation districts, in power bills, and it has potentially devastating impacts because the mussels are filter feeders, and so they'll filter out a lot of the biological species in the water and prevent other species that currently are using those resources. So it could have significant impacts on fish and other native species. So,
Has the state identified any sort of a funding source for everything you just mentioned? Like, let's say that happens and there's all these impacts to downstream irrigators and municipal water systems and parks and recreation folks and stuff. Is there some sort of a funding mechanism to help do what needs to be done if that was the worst case scenario?
so right now, the AIS fee that's, waterway access permit for non-motorized boaters, boater registrations, so that pays for current activity levels. And that's primarily used for detection and monitoring of boats coming into the state. OSMB has some funds that we've accumulated over the years where we've funded ODF and W, but they haven't used all those funds, so some of those funds revert back to us. We don't have authority to spend those funds, so they're sitting in our bank account. That we would, in the event of emergency, we would use those funds.
I guess what I'm
I think
thinking
at the
is,
statewide member.
yeah, the
member level,
mitigation stuff.
Yeah, at the statewide level, if the big one hits, so to speak, there's not just like a contingency fund sitting out there. We've got different pots of money that would probably be used in the initial responses.
Yeah.
And then it would most likely become an e-board, almost like a wildfire type issue of trying to figure out where the funding was going to come from to mitigate, right? So it's one of the challenges with the state is we're not good at having sinking funds because our budget rules don't always allow that. And so things get dealt with as an emergency. So, we have some funding, ODFW has some funding, there's an invasive species council. And so there'd probably be a limp along and then quickly followed by an e-board request at the state level fund.
Yeah, and I just, you have one here that kind of never thought you'd see on an Oregon waterway. Maybe we did think it was just, all nervous of that, and how fast that can grow, and all of that infrastructure downstream from that, irrigation reservoir or whatnot, that all of those different parties should be aware of that and planning for that as well.
Yep. Interesting. So ODF and W is working on a boat inspection station for the Oahe River. That would be the first one, because right now all of our boat check stations are on points of entry. So Ontario, Ashland, Hermiston. So we're looking for boats coming into the state. They're looking at one on putting it on the, let's see, do I have? Actually, forward. In your packet, I do have some material, I believe, on the Oahe Reservoir. So there's primarily one road going into the Oahe Reservoir, and ODF and W is working with the irrigation district and the county to put boat inspection station on that roadway. But that will be the first in kind. Mind also understanding, nope, pull that back. So they're working with other entities, tribal entities, to see if we can add more boat inspection stations, but the Oahe will be the first one.
Thank you.
Along a similar line for that, if you read some of the material that Representative Helm put out as to why he wanted to increase the AIS fees, one of the things he was talking was he realized like he and his family do pack rafting, and they fold them up and they put them in their bags and they put them in the back of their car, and all of a sudden it's kind of like, shouldn't I be being inspected too? And so getting that word out to people that inflatables count,
Yes.
and inflatable non-motorized boats count. I think that there is potential, again, if somebody is in an infested waterway who hasn't properly cleaned, drained, and dried their inflatable, that they could really wreak some havoc, that they don't even know that the phrase I love to use, they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
So even more education to the non-motorized and the inflatable community.
And Chair Jackson, I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think one of the biggest misconceptions I see just on some of the online chatter, which is understandable, is people always assume that they're going to see a mussel attached to their boat, and that's what's going to be, what transports it water to water body. That's certainly a possibility, but so is a microscopic level thing. A lot of fishermen in other parts of our country are keenly aware that their felt waders are a good, potential spreader. And so I think folks sometimes with those pack raft and inflatables and fold-ups say, well, I'm not going to have this, I'm not going to see this mussel attached to my boat. No, you're not. But you bringing water that could have microscopic juveniles is going to spread it just the
Right.
same. So.
Thank you, Alan. Any other questions or comments? Member
Well-
Wild, I can't see you. Okay.
So that's a good segue to the next portion. So with House Bill 2982, that was Helm's bill to increase the waterway access, well, to increase the AIS fee and eliminate the 10-foot exemption, so that impacted waterway access fee. What we're doing is, we have a pretty good infrastructure on boats coming into the state. Where we're lacking is in-state water body to water body transmission. So we have some available funds from the House Bill 2982 bill. What we're looking at is installing boat cleaning stations as a pilot program to kind of understand if they're going to work, where we need to locate them, et cetera. So we've identified a company, it's called CD3 Systems, and they're really the only provider of these facilities. And what it is, this is a portable trailer unit. They do have ones that are set in permanently. We're looking at purchasing a couple of these units on a pilot project basis to, take them to a couple, what we would consider hotspots or potential water bodies where there's some form of aquatic invasive species, whether that's mud snails. Janine said there's one water body that has fleas. There's various invasive plant materials. And so we're going to look at, installing these units at those water bodies. And looking at this unit, on the back end, you have essentially a wet dry vac. And so paddlers can use that to clean out all the standing water that accumulates inside their canoe, kayak, inflatable or not. In the middle, there's some brushes, there's some tongs, and so brushes easily clean the hull. Tongs are generally designed to reach under a boat in a trailer to grab plant material that's hard to reach. In the middle of between the tong and the brush, there's a tool. That's a tool for removing drain plugs from boats. And then on the left side is an air compressor, so you can blow off different, debris, etc. This one has a solar panel, and so that'll power the unit. And so we're looking at purchasing, depending on costs, finding the right partners, purchasing 2 to 3 of these units, working with the facility managers to site them. We're also looking at providing them with some operation funds. One of the things with the wet dry vac, because it is potentially contaminated water, they need to have like a wastewater facility come in. They can't just dump it in the back 40. Some replacement tools, and partnering with those entities. There is a electronic system or Wi-Fi capability, so we can monitor when different pieces of equipment are used, so we can track the usage. And being mobile, we can take it in the winter. We can move it from location to location to see where it makes sense to put them. If there's like a paddle dock, we could try it near the paddle dock. We could try it near the boat ramp. We could try it at a common location where both paddlers and boaters can use it, or motorized boaters can use it. So we're looking at this as a potential solution for the clean, drain, dry. This is a clean component. We're doing it now as a pilot project. If it's successful, we'll be looking at creating a standard grant program where if somebody wants one of these facilities, we can provide those units. Funding operational expenses, and that could be staff time as well. We're still in the early stages. Here I talked about the Oahe location for the boat inspection station. So, talking with Director Waring, I don't think we need board approval to do this, but we would certainly like your blessing. And if you have any questions on what we're thinking, we'd be happy to share.
Great. I think it's an important step forward. And it also, I think, helps with people who are now paying more money per year for their waterway access permits or their registrations to actually see more on the ground proactive work being done.
We do have one boat cleaning station in service at 10 Mile Lake, but essentially it's a car wash. It's 2 bays, there's a pressure washer. It's a great facility, but it takes up a significant amount of space because you have, the capacity to drive 2 boats in. They need a water system, they need power, they have a drain field or a settling pond. And so that's not something going forward that we can replicate, where the CD3 unit is pretty compact, and they have different units where one is just a single pedestal that has like tongs and brushes so that somebody could brush their kayak or grab, and that's just a single post unit. And, there's various units in between, and this would be the Cadillac that we're looking at.
Sure. Any other questions or comments?
I would just say that I love the portability aspect of it. I think that just gives you way more flexibility and options to be able to move it to a hotspot if you need to move it to a hotspot, et cetera. So good job on that aspect. Buy some extra brushes and tongs for the facility providers, please, because those will get stolen probably on weekend one if they're staying down there. They look pretty useful. And then just kind of thirdly, kind of what Chair Jackson was saying as far as the visibility of this for folks who are buying their waterway access permit. I also think and you guys, ODF, NW is probably already doing this, and Marine Board is, but just continuing to engage with all the people that I was talking about earlier, the irrigators, the municipal water folks, the park and recreation people. These folks will be devastated if we have a large-scale event, and I'm just speaking from a park facility manager standpoint. These folks are, you guys saw it yesterday at Lake Billy Chinook. They're already taking huge hits from smoke, harmful algae, and they need to know the importance of these types of setups and the buy-in to hopefully supporting them for use.
And on the Oahe, the Malheur Irrigation District is a big driver behind that. So those entities are aware of the issues and they are concerned. So I think as we expand this program, we'll find willing participants.
Great. Any other questions or comments?
I'll add one. I just think it's great, obviously, the proactive side to a potentially very scary situation, and also looking at the education side when it comes to the inflatable and non-motorized boards or boats or whatever craft that's going out in the water. So I can see a lot of different places where this would be very helpful and useful. So just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to item D, the personal flotation device rulemaking with Phil.
Good.
You can probably turn Phil down.
I won't take that personal.
We
Thank you.
can
Thank you,
get Alan to
everyone.
talk into the mic. We can probably get you to do that. So we're not hiring anybody over about 5'11" in the future, so they can be right on the mic.
There you go. Well, good morning, Chair Jackson, Vice Chair Lambert, members of the State Marine Board. I'm Phil Hudspeth. I'm your boating policy and environmental coordinator. I'm on Alan's team here at the Marine Board. I'm bringing to you a request for 2 technical fixes with our Oregon administrative rules. But before I jump in with those, like with most things at the Marine Board, it is a team effort, and I really want to thank Brian Polson for his leadership and guidance with these 2 OARs. I want to thank Cindy and Marianne on his team for their expertise and guidance with the areas. Thank Jennifer Cooper for her instruction, making sure that we're following what we need to do to implement new OARs. And I also want to thank the Marine Board leadership team for their input and guidance on these 2 items. So the first one that I'm bringing to you, okay. All right, we're got two items. The first one is to update our language with the Coast Guard for personal flotation devices there. As you might recall, back at December of 2024, the Coast Guard Boating Safety Division conducted an on-site review, and they found some minor deficiencies in the Marine Board regulation related to PFDs. And specifically, the Coast Guard is asking us to update the performance rating for PFDs, and the new language would include approved by the Coast Guard, and it would allow for new labeling regarding levels and performance of approved activity. So the Coast Guard no longer uses the term inherently buoyant and now uses the term foam fill. They request that we also update the effective dates of our equipment requirements for charter boats and charter guides there. Based on these rule deficiencies, our Coast Guard recreational boating safety grant is in conditional approval status until these deficiencies are corrected there. Okay. These are what the current rules are. I'm not going to read this unless you request so. Okay. The rule changes, the changes were bolded. What is being removed was in parentheses there. So you can see that it's reflecting the type and the performance levels. This is the service dates. Okay. And the operating rules, adding foam filled. Okay, going through your board authority. It's in ORS 830.110. And this is in relations to cooperating with federal agencies to promote uniformity of laws relating to boating and their enforcement there. Excuse me. Okay. We don't anticipate a physical impact by implementing these new rules. It does ensure that the Marine Board continues to receive the Coast Guard grant there. This won't have an impact for small businesses to purchase new PFDs or make any other changes that could impact the small businesses there. So the board options can accept the proposed rules to amend the provisions of the OARs, or the board has the authority to deny rulemaking or to make any modifications to the proposed rules. So staff is requesting that the board opens rulemaking on the proposed rules. This would meet the Coast Guard's requirements and are necessary to ensure approval of our future grants there.
Thank you, Phil. Are there any questions or comments on this issue? To me, it seems like it's kind of a no-brainer. It's basically semantics on wording of things to make us consistent with them. And if it's going to help ensure that we keep getting our grants, yeah.
I agree.
The one thing I do like, whenever I say like inherent flotation, people look at me like, huh? And if you say foam filled, it's like, oh, I got it. So putting that actually in our state laws makes a whole lot of sense. It kind of goes back to some of that accessibility and readability things. Take out the jargon and make it understandable. Any other questions?
I was just going to comment, Phil, I appreciate, I've mentioned this in past meetings, but I always appreciate it in your guys' presentations when you put the board authority there, so we clearly know what part of statute gives us the authority to make this recommendation. So thank you for doing that.
That will forever be known as the Member Lambert clause.
Any other questions, comments for Phil? So do I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the wording as written in the board book.
to open rulemaking?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll second that. We have a motion and a second to open rulemaking based on the language provided in the board book to become consistent with the Coast Guard. Do we have any other questions, comments? We have a motion and a second to approve opening rulemaking on the language in the board book. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All right, that one's approved.
Great.
We are now going to talk about Snake River reciprocity for outfitter guides. Phil?
Great, thank you. Brian is in the wing, so if we get a little too much more technical, he can certainly answer these questions. Oregon and Washington, the state of Washington has a reciprocity rule in place between Oregon and Washington guides. So essentially, if you're a Washington guide, you can only, and you're not registered in Oregon, you can only pick up guides in Washington and drop them off, or clients, excuse me, pick up clients in the state of Washington, drop them off in the state of Washington. If they're registered in both states, they can pick clients up in Oregon, Washington, drop them off. This is only for the Columbian, right? So there's not a similar rule on Idaho, with Idaho on the Snake River. Idaho currently has a rule that says that which prohibits an Oregon registered or licensed guide from using the Idaho side of the Snake River. So currently, Idaho guides can use the Oregon side. They can launch, they can pick up clients, they can drop clients off. So this is a request that's coming through the state police and the Oregon Department of Justice and from the Marine Board's Outfitter Guide Committee, and to add a clarity around operating on the Snake River there. So we're proposing a rule to ensure uniformity between Oregon and Idaho for outfitter guides. We believe these changes will only apply to outfitter guides, and we don't anticipate any negative impact on Oregon boaters there. And so you can see the stretch of the river that we're talking about between Oregon and Washington, or excuse me, Oregon and Idaho. Okay. For Member Lambert, this is where your board authority lies. And this is the proposed rule. And I'll be happy to go through this, or since you have it in front of you, but it essentially is, as I outlined, it would allow, it would make it clear that Idaho guides can only, if they're not registered in Oregon, can only operate in and out of Idaho. This would be similar to the reciprocity that Oregon and Washington currently enjoy there.
Okay.
All right. We do not anticipate a physical impact to Oregon boaters. There will be a physical impact to Idaho outfitters and guides who operate in Oregon, which could be a potential positive benefit to the State Marine Board by requiring Idaho guides to be registered in Oregon. And we do not anticipate any physical impact on the public, local governments, or state agencies there. And as with the previous rule, the board can open rulemaking for the rule as proposed. They can amend it or they can deny rulemaking. Staff recommendation is to accept it as proposed.
I'd make a motion for that.
Okay, I was going to say, do we have any questions or comments for Phil before we make a motion?
Can I just ask one question of you, Phil?
Sure.
Please. So just so I understand it, the current language for Washington was pretty specific about dropping off, picking up, et cetera. The proposed language for Idaho was more broad. Wasn't that specific? And maybe I'm just not understanding the language correctly. So I'm sure there was a reason for that. I'm just curious what that reason was for.
I'll step aside and let Brian answer that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. It's taken me 8 years to learn the Outfitter Guide program, so it can be a little convoluted. Member Lambert, if I understood your question, the current OARs for Washington, you were saying are not as broad as Idaho, is that correct?
Well, what was presented, and again, this, I just might have misunderstood it, but it appeared to what was presented in the beginning slides where we were talking about the Washington it was very specific of if you have, license in both, you can drop off here, pick up here, et cetera. Whereas the language that was proposed for Idaho didn't seem to be that specific. It just said the Marine Board can adopt rules. So,
Real quick, so in statute, it says essentially that the Marine Board may make rules regarding reciprocity, and essentially we're talking about boundary waters. So for Washington, just so I can try and make sure I'm describing it properly, Washington right now, people who are registered in Washington, people who are registered in Oregon, they can do business on the Columbia River where it forms a boundary with both states. If I'm a registered Oregon guide but not a registered Washington guide, I can only do business out of Oregon side of the waterway, whether that's picking up clients, whether that's dropping them off, whether that's camping, that type of thing. The proposed language reflects that same type of authority in regards to right now, the statute doesn't bridge what is in OAR or what's needed for our law enforcement partners to enforce that. So we have guides operating on the Snake River that are not licensed in Oregon doing business on the Oregon side, whether they're dropping off clients, dropping off camps for hunting, guides, rafting trips, motorized, that type of thing. And so my understanding on the proposed rule, which in all fairness has been reviewed by DOJ because we've been working on this for a year and a half, it caters to what the Idaho boundary is and what the challenges we've had with enforcement.
okay.
I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. Just
Thank you.
context there.
I think, Member Lambert, I also see what might have been part of the confusion was just in the board book, in the proposed rule, we recite the ORS statute. And the ORS statute's very, very broad and vague.
Yeah.
And so we're just highlighting that that's given us the authority to do the very much specific rule, just like we did for Washington.
Okay.
So the actual rule language would be specific, just like Washington, or similarly specific. The statute, of course, broad, just telling us we may. I bet you in reading it, just.
So will there be another rule coming that's more specific? And this is the rule just to give us the authority? Or does that make sense?
So the statute gives us authority for Washington and Idaho both.
Yeah. Got that.
We have in OARs the reciprocity of Washington. The proposed rule is to have the same reciprocity of Idaho.
Okay. I trust you guys got it figured out. I trust DOJ did. I was just a little confused in reading it.
And
So
I was a bit confused on just, and then I started looking at like, okay, this is like summary language as opposed to this is
Yeah.
statutory language, and so the summary language was a little bit more lax.
So just to make sure it's clear, if the board elected to open rulemaking, what staff would move forward with would be the same language for Washington as Idaho. And the next time you would see it in rule language, it would look the same, and we would be asking you to adopt the rule.
That's what I wanted to hear. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Phil or Brian? So we have a motion to open rulemaking to match Oregon-Washington reciprocity to create Oregon-Idaho reciprocity. Do we have a second?
Second it.
We have a motion and a second. Member Wild, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. Because we're looking at text on the screen, so I can't see you. We have a motion and a second to open rulemaking to match Oregon-Idaho reciprocity with Oregon-Washington reciprocity. Do we have any further discussion? So those in favor of opening rulemaking as previously described signify by saying aye.
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 All right. Motion passes. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Brian. So our next item on the agenda is the chair and vice chair elections for next year. Our year operates from July 1 to June 31. So this would be the person who would preside over the next year's worth of meetings starting in October. Is there anybody who wants to do it?
So I will say I'm happy to do it, to serve as the chair, if the board should so choose. I think you're departing in July of 27?
End of June.
End of June of 27. So I think I've had a couple years to follow your lead and learn how you run meetings, learn how you do things, and I feel that I'm prepared to be able to accept that and then do that for a year while some of our newer members continue to gather information and assume that for me. I do think, you know, there's benefit in a rotating process, as was described previously by Director Warren. I think that gives everybody a chance to learn, everybody a chance to accept that challenge and serve that role, know what's demanded of that person in that role. I've watched you do it for the past couple years, and I think that's a good way to go. So, my 2 cents.
I second that.
Okay, so it sounds like we have a self-nomination from.
No, I did. I said, you asked if anybody was willing. I said, I'm happy to do it.
All right, we have
Don't
somebody who's
nominate
willing to do it.
myself.
I'm also willing to do it. So I don't really want to make this like a popularity contest or whatever. I'm happy to step back and let Member Lambert do it.
I guess I didn't understand how this is. Yeah, I guess you will be here for another full year. Yeah, my bad. I was thinking 6 months in that role.
So this
I
is
think you both do
awkward.
an incredible job. Let's put it like that. From the few months that I've had to, you know, see how meetings are run and the dialogue between you two is phenomenal. So I would support either of you, whoever chooses to be in the chair role or vice chair role.
I would prefer not to flip for it. I think it's up to these two folks
Yeah,
at that point.
Yeah, I'm in support of you guys just kind of switching hats, right? Member Lambert becomes chair and Chair Jackson becomes vice. Does that make sense?
I'm fine with that.
That way, Member Wild and I could still feel like we're not drinking from a fire hose anymore on the language and so forth that we're trying to figure out.
I guess what I would, this is awkward. And I'll acknowledge the awkwardness of it. As I mentioned earlier, I do think there's some benefit in, if I was to be selected for that, I do think that there's some benefit to either Member Wild or Member Messett moving into the vice chair role to be kind of learning about that responsibility as well for a smooth transition. If we did move to that rotating thing where I was only serving in it for a year and one of you two stepped into that in the next year,
So let me ask this question. You're up at the end of next June as well.
correct.
So are you intending to re-up?
I would, if the governor would want me to. Yes,
Okay.
at that point.
But can I ask one question as well? On that note, Laura, you're not able, you've already done 2
I'm
terms. You're
done.
not able to.
I'm done
Yeah.
next June.
Up to you. If you guys are both happy in your current roles, I don't see necessarily a need to change the status quo going forward, especially for the fact that I personally am not ready to step into a vice chair role at this point. I don't know, Member Messett perhaps would like to. So, you know, if you want to have the rolling step over, I am fine for that, but I would rather wait a little bit longer just so I have some more experience in terms of understanding the language and procedural processes necessary before stepping into a role like that. And I certainly appreciate both of your guidance in understanding this process. So given the timeline of Laura's term on the board, but then also, Steve, how much more time you have going forward. I like things the way they are, but I'm also open to change too. And also, you know, whatever will be the best for the board to move forward. And I know it's also difficult at the moment because we are a board of 4, and that will change in the future. But I think that, you know, either we're gonna be great, it's gonna be successful regardless of who is in the chair seat. I totally understand how much time it takes to prepare the meetings and all that, so I will fully respect either one of you. But I personally would not be ready to step into a role of vice chair at this point in time, and would like to have a little bit more time under my feet before then.
What about yourself? Same. Well, that being said, knowing that neither of you are interested in a vice chair or chair, I would just say, I think it would be beneficial for me, if I was serving in a chair role, to have somebody who's had the tenure that Chair Jackson has had for the next year to be able to learn from and ask advice and whatnot.
Okay.
So,
I'm fine with that. So I'm going to make a motion that we elect Member Lambert as chair and myself as vice chair for the coming year.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
I,
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Moving on to the next one, meeting dates and locations.
Chair Jackson, member of the board, just for the record, since none of you were here, that was nowhere close to the most awkward one of those, so good job. The meeting board locations, we like to give you all, you're all busy people, so we plan our meetings typically 2 years out. As a reminder, during full legislative sessions, we really need to stay close to home. That's primarily because Alan and I and often are at the Capitol on last minute notices, so we do 3 at Salem, 1 away, and then on a short session year, we do 3 away, 1 in Salem. Looking at our locations and dates, typically when we're in Salem, we don't do tours, but occasionally we have work sessions. So if you were planning your life, you all have now been on the board long enough to kind of know that that's the actual meeting date, but to think about some of the travel. And the big one would be probably out at that 2028, which is forever. But again, I know some of us are calendared out. I would expect that July 20th meeting date, we'd probably stay in LeGrand, do some sort of tour in Wallowa Lake on the 19th, have the meeting in LeGrand on the 20th. That's a long haul over there. So just, as you're planning your life, it's a long drive over there. So that one might take a little one extra day in there. So, and again, we pick these locations based off just generally trying to spread around the state so you have a chance to see different parts of the state. We don't try to base them off where we have any hot topic issues. Sometimes we'll base it off of where we know there's some cool facility things going on that you may want to see. So these are all locations we haven't been in a long time. So, and they spread us around the state over the next 2 years.
would it be, just something to throw out there, the July meetings or that late summer meeting, would it be beneficial to maybe think about not holding those in central and eastern Oregon? Moving forward with the dry summers and wildfires that we're seeing, and maybe move that to a spring, and I don't know, just a thought. So we don't have tours canceled like we had yesterday because of the smoke. Maybe I'm just a pessimist and.
Yeah.
Florence in July would be a nice place to be a lot of times.
Yeah.
Member Lambert, that's probably a great recommendation. Not probably, it is. We driving over the other day, I'm like, yeah, who thought of Madras in the summer? And I said, probably me. So, if the board doesn't mind, I can't remember if we had any constraints around the locations. Would the board be okay if staff, after this meeting, just convened and thought about whether October or April would make sense for the swap out there? Chair Jackson's correct, Florence, in the July probably feels nicer. I don't think we have big snow concerns up around Wallowa Lake in April. Janine's telling me I'm wrong. So we may look at if that would be okay, doing some wholesale flopping around. But
Yeah.
you're right. I think we run a risk of a fire in July if we go to Wallowa Lake. So we may think about doing that one in October and moving some things around that way.
I certainly appreciate that.
So our next item is the board meeting timelines. And looks like we've basically just scheduled out through October on that. And I know that Member Wild has a question about one of the items on there.
Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that in October, however the procedural process goes forward, but we can start talking about the waterway access permit rule language and also life jacket use language for specific sports. Some of the current rules, as they're stated, use very, very outdated language that doesn't actually represent the sports that are current. So I would like to work on getting those updated. So users, particularly around stand-up paddling, foiling sports, windsurfing, kiting, wing foiling, and now the new sport of parawinging, they don't really fit into the categories of the language as stated. And so just to make sure it does reflect the broad user group, so it's not confusing when looking at the rules to be like, do I need a waterway access permit? Do I have to wear a life jacket? Like, depending on what type of sport somebody's doing. There's been a lot of confusion here on the Columbia River about that. And just that makes it so much easier for the shops to know how they need to sell their waterway access permits, or, you know, guide them to the website to buy them, and also the life jacket use. So that would be my big request, that, you know, whether we open up the potential to change some of the wording in there. It's fortunately not that many sentences in terms of the existing language. So it would be relatively fast in terms of making those adjustments, but I just want to make sure that is on the docket for something to speak about, so we can have those properly reflected for the user groups.
Member Wild, first off, I appreciate it. The whole point of this agenda item is to make sure we're talking about the things that the board wants to. The second one, the waterway access rules, what I would anticipate that looking like is we'd probably be giving an overview of the current rules, and then we would be proposing as staff to open the rule-making process up. And if there was a board member that knew a whole lot about this stuff that was willing to work with us after those rules were open in October, you know, we'd get through working through that rule-making process. So we won't have most likely proposed language in October, but we would anticipate doing a current state and then asking to open, and then relying on expertise of board members to help us come up with some proposed language and move it through our rule process. So that would be great.
And that kind of goes back to one of the other ones, is boating technology changes. To have more understanding of what is wing foiling, what is kite foiling, what is all of that stuff. And again, how quickly that whole world, the motorized foils, all this stuff, how quickly that's changing, but also bringing it into motorized kayaks and some of the other things that we're now seeing motors pop up on that we never saw. So kind of maybe flipping those two discussions, or having the one about technology changes first, and then moving that into how does this influence the waterway access permit?
Chair Jackson, that's a great recommendation. Member Wild, we may be calling you sooner than later. I heard parawinging in there. That sounds like one more thing I won't be able to do.
You can do it. You can definitely do it. Yeah, the sports are devolving very quickly, and I think it is really important to include e-foils in that. You know, there's within stand-up paddling, there's stand-up paddling, and then there's stand-up foiling. Within every subcategory of kiteboarding or windsurfing, there's a foil. So yeah, just to have clear language. We don't need to jump into the intricacies of that now, but I do really look forward to working with staff to improve that a bit.
Appreciate that. And yes, the boating technology change, that's helpful too, to know just more of what, you've mentioned this one a few times, and so helpful to know what's on your mind, so we think about how we pull that presentation together.
Thank you.
And I would just point out that, again, the whole point of this is just to make sure staff's talking about what the board wants. So if you have things that you would like us to bring in the future, you can tell us now, or you can tell us anytime. So if you have an idea for a topic, something you want to discuss, you can always email Jennifer or myself, and we'll push it onto the timeline and just make sure we're thinking about the things that you want to think about. So.
Great. With that, we've covered our agenda. I guess the one thing I would like to say after finishing the agenda, because everybody here has heard it, but Fiona hasn't, right? We're having some staff changes coming very soon, and so I personally would like to thank Christy Cornish for all the help that she's provided to our board. She's moving to the Secretary of State's office
August 17th.
August 17th.
Oh,
So congratulations, and we will miss you terribly. However, Brian Paulson will be moving into Christie's role. So welcome, Brian, to a whole nother aspect of the agency. And I guess a job opening will be posted soon for a boating safety manager.
True. Although it will be hard for Christie to get to the Secretary of State with 4 flat tires.
Self-incrimination.
I
So
assume
with
there's a
that-
story behind that.
Just that I'm going to slash your tires. and key your car.
All right, so with that,
Thank you very much for
we are
everything
done.
you have done.
All right.
All right. We'll see.
I just lost sound.